Ladies and gentlemen, I am SidAlpha, and today we're doing something that I haven't done nearly enough of in recent years, and that is to present a video where we ask and hopefully answer the question, is it worth it for the game Cygni? Is it worth playing? Is it worth buying? Is it worth the price? And bear with me, it's been a while since I was able to sit down and conduct a game review without it being part of a Dirty Devs video of some kind, so bear with me as I shake a little of the rust loose on my old Critic's bike wheels. And full disclosure, I did not purchase my copy of this game. It was provided to me via review code. Now, as I said, the game is Cygni, a Schmup-style game which released on August 5th, developed by KeelWorks and published by Konami. And no, right off the bat, from what I could tell, the game does not make use of, nor does it include, the Konami code, which, given the publisher's namesake, I feel is a bit of a tragedy right from the get-go. Another bit of a tragedy is the Is It Worth It video series is traditionally a first impressions critique, and that is what I planned as I played through an additional half hour of the game this morning, thinking to beat Stage 7 and move on to the next world. But this will not be a first impressions critique because those 7 stages, yeah, they're all the game has to offer. So, taking that into account, let's see if those 7 stages are worth that $30 asking price. And to do that, we'll start off at the beginning, as the beginning is always a good place to start, and that means the options menu. If you don't do well here, then I won't expect you to do well in the rest of the game either. So for the options menu, we've got your usual categories: gameplay, sound, controls, graphics, and language selection. And for gameplay, we've got a leaderboard, camera shake, and HUD options. Now, one thing I will note here is that given this game is a shmup, like I mentioned, sometimes it can be rather difficult to see your shield and weapon energy levels due to the bullet hell nature of some areas. So this is a good inclusion to have, and for any future playthroughs, you can bet I will be turning those options on. Next up, we have the sound options with your 3 traditional sliders, but some decent quality of life options included here as well, such as the ambient audio balance and an equalizer option with selections for speakers, headphones, TV, or crushed. Next, there are the control options, which include both keyboard and mouse as well as controller, and it also shows button layouts for both Xbox and PlayStation control schemes, and all the control selections are rebindable, which should be a given in this day and age, but you'd be surprised just how often that is actually overlooked. Next up, we have graphics, which have a few standard selections, but there is no DLSS or FRS options, which is a big no-no, even though the game really doesn't need either frame rate generation technologies. One thing I will say is you're going to want to head straight to this option area the moment you launch the game, as the game does not even attempt to auto-detect the resolution of the monitor is being displayed on, and starts out at an exceptionally low resolution. And then finally, we have the language selection, which it does have a fair amount of language selections for the interface and subtitles, but the game does have voiced cutscenes, and as you can see, only some of those voiceovers have been dubbed in different languages. So all in all, the option selections are good, but not great. Serviceable enough, but there is one extremely notable option tree that is completely absent from this game, and that would be accessibility options. No color correction options or anything else to be had anywhere. So if that is something some of you require, you might want to give this game a pass. Next, we have to ask, what is Cygni? What is it about? Well, it is a traditional style shmup with a few twists at its core. It does have a story, but the very beginning of the story shows a little bit of an identity crisis. The initial cutscene is upbeat with some jaunty music that does do a good job of getting the player into a let's do this mindset, but after that initial cutscene, the tone and the story does a complete 180 into your rather bog-standard war-torn fight for survival grittiness, which leads me to believe the initial jaunty cutscene was mostly there as a key promotional focus and doesn't necessarily tie into the rest of the overarching story. The only way that it could would be if your character getting ready to head out in their hoverplane, which the devs are really proud of the look of that ship. Reminds me quite a bit of Star Citizen or Starfield in that regard, only to have the war sprung on her suddenly, which if that is the case, they really do an extremely poor job of relating that feeling to the player. The story is your usual alien machines are trying to wipe everyone out, so fight all the alien machines until you kill the big bad. Fairly bog standard story arc, but it's serviceable enough. One of these days I'll get a shmup that goes all in on a meaningful story with characters, interactions, and choices, but this game, just like every other shmup in existence, will leave that dream of mine continue to remain unfulfilled. Now, as far as gameplay is concerned, Cygni does have a fair amount going for it. Firstly, the visuals are fantastic. The enemies, while not exactly what I would call varied in type, style, and pattern, all look amazing. Far better than I expected, to be honest. One thing to note with the controls, however, is that traversing on the diagonal is faster than flat X or Y axis movement. There's also an acceleration curve there, which is slight but noticeable, and it can throw you off until you get accustomed to it. I would love to see the optional ability to turn these off for those that might wish it, but just be aware that it does take a little getting used to, and there's nothing that you can do about it. They're slight and not at all very pronounced, but still definitely present enough for an older person like me to notice. Someone who is more of a Schmup fan than me, I'm certain, would find those aspects even more apparent than I do, and probably even more frustrating. Also, the game does introduce you to combating both ground-based and air-based opponents, sometimes simultaneously, where you do not have the option of firing on both at the same time. Your air-to-ground weaponry with your left trigger and your air-to-air weaponry with your right cannot be fired at the same time, which is a decent inclusion and varies up the combat nicely. You also have options to either enable homing with your weaponry or turn it off, and there are definitely scenarios where one option will be more beneficial than the other. You can, once unlocked, also have a selection of different firing patterns, allowing you more versatility tailored to the different enemy types and your own personal playstyle. Now, the game does introduce you to energy selection right away. You have your weapon energy, which is tied to your missiles and later on your special weapons, which of course is limited in nature. You also have your shield energy. Now, you can transfer energy between the two systems with your left and right bumpers. This will allow you to remove some of your survivability in favor of doling out more missile volleys, or it will allow you to remove some weapon energy to keep yourself from getting horribly destroyed. One thing I will note is that the drops from the opponents are just one type. Energy. No power-ups, no special weapon boosts or anything like that, just energy. And that energy pickup only refills your shield energy. It doesn't automatically refill your weapon energy once your shield energy is full, so you will have to stay on top of that, otherwise the energy pickup will just be wasted. And as the game can be rather punishing, that's definitely not something to ignore. I don't know if this was a design choice or not with the pickups only recharging shields, but it definitely feels like an oversight and adds extremely unnecessary micromanaging to the game. Also, using the right stick, you can tilt on the slight diagonal to the left or the right, but the game so far does not allow for a full 360 degrees of fire. Partly, I think, due to the fact that allowing that would defeat the design surrounding the patterns of some of the bosses and other enemy types. Other than that, as I said, the game does only have 7 stages, but the stages are quite varied, even if the enemy types are not. Thankfully, while your normal enemies can begin to feel quite samey in nature, the bosses themselves are both fantastic looking and extremely varied from each other in terms of abilities, patterns, and what it takes to defeat them. Also, let's talk upgrades. You're going to need them. On the left-hand side, you'll see the gun and drone presets, which will allow an increased spread of fire as you go down the list, along with saved design presets that you can choose from based on which mission would benefit from which preset the most, something you will learn as you play the missions. Then below that, you have the option to upgrade your homing missiles from 6 to 8 and then from 8 to 10, along with your radial damage, which isn't really explained well, but it's the splash damage capability of your homing missiles. The unupgraded value is 30%. Then you have your special upgrades for your air-to-surface and air-to-air attacks, as well as the WMD, which, as you might imagine, is just a burst wave from your ship that will destroy most anything on your screen except bosses. And while I only play the game on easy mode, these upgrades will be vital to progression on harder difficulties, even for more accomplished Schmup players than me, particularly the salvo and 2 extra gun module upgrades. One thing I will note, higher difficulties was actually more difficult on Mission 1 than subsequent missions, because Mission 1 has 3 bosses and all the rest only have 1, and Mission 1 is probably the longest out of all of them except for Mission 7. One other thing of note is the library, particularly the planetarium, which shows the solar system you're in, and the game and its 7 missions take place on Cygni Prime. One thing of note is there are a total of 3 other planets and 6 moons, none of which are utilized in the game outside of the planets stating future expeditions are pending. Now, this tells me that likely there will be more content planned for the game at a future date, quite likely as paid DLC, but for now, the planetarium is just flavor. The game, mechanically, is extremely stable. I saw no meaningful glitches, bugs, or crashes, and the game did maintain a steady frame rate around 60 frames per second and above. So game optimization does not appear to be an issue. But the primary issue that this game runs into is the fact that it only has 7 stages. However, it is rather difficult of a game, and given the more powerful upgrades do take a fair amount of playtime to unlock, completionists will likely get some fairly good value out of the game. However, more casual players likely won't find much that will lend to multiple playthroughs. So the replay value of the game is going to be very much a mixed bag and completely dependent on the personal preferences of the individual player. For some, it will have a lot of replay value, which will still be somewhat hampered by the shockingly small number of missions, while others will have a much more difficult time justifying continuing to play the game after their initial run-through. Cygnus is very much a mixed bag. Bear in mind that an initial full run-through of the game for me took barely 2 hours, just long enough of a playtime to run over the refund window Steam has for returning games. And that may not be mere coincidence. The first stage is the only one that has multiple bosses, and some of the stages do feel like they are artificially lengthened, which I suspect might be due to their wanting to prevent refunds after a full initial playthrough. Now, I can't hammer enough on the game only having 7 missions. It's short, shockingly so. And even though it is a difficult game for a shmup, the lack of missions really hinders the replay value even for more dedicated players who would want to go through and get all of the upgrades unlocked, which will take a while and will necessitate numerous full playthroughs and grinding to achieve. My worry is that the game will become just too uninteresting before achieving all of those unlocks. And taking that into consideration, while it is a good game for what is on offer here, is it good enough to warrant a $30 price tag? Is it actually worth it? Now, I like the game, I do. It's a good game. I really enjoyed the run through that I had. But I don't think there's enough of a good game here to warrant that $30 asking price. If it were on sale for half that cost, then I would say without a doubt, zero hesitation, yes. If you enjoy shmups, then get it. I don't think you'll be disappointed. But at $30, I honestly feel like it's probably not worth it. But what do I know? I'm just a mook with a mic. This has been a look at Cygnus by KeelWorks and published by Konami. It is available right now on Steam for $30. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, I am SidAlpha, and I'll see you next time.